clean, and it's cheaper than all these others. Mr. Chairman, 10 years later, that dream has not been realized. My worry is 5 years from today, we'll be sitting on the same table discussing about the cost of power. We have said, let us finance Kenya Power. Kenya Power is being financed by Kenyans. These days, I refer to it as a criminal enterprise because we support them on exchange. They bill you to recover the loss of exchange. If the shilling changes today, the dollar changes, you pay for it. Inflation changes, you pay for it. Why would that company be making loss? Why would that company be making loss perennially? And we are told, we have to support it. Last year, June, we were paying 3 million shillings electricity bill. Last month, we paid 6.1 million. The same capacity consumption. So you can't develop a country if your cost of energy, yes, monthly.
Okay. For a small enterprise.
You can never develop a country if the cost of energy, it's something like that. So I think, with respect, Mr. Chairman, unless we deal with the issue of power, we cannot talk of developing this country forward. When the power was reliable, and it was cheap, and it was available, Kenya was a powerhouse for manufacturing. The whole of Eastern Africa was dependent on Kenya. Today, our manufacturing is gone. It's not only contracting. There's an exodus over the last 10, 15 years by many companies. People have moved to where the cost of production is cheaper. Because cost of production is the main thing. You can't compete. If my water is going to be, every time we're thinking of manufacturing, you are thinking of how much is it going to cost. Will I be able to sell? So that's the challenge. And energy is one of the largest, the main component. Plus, of course, the many regulatory and other challenges that we have. So I think, Mr. Chairman, let me leave it and then we'll deal with questions in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Please.
You said you're going to comment on the G2G. You need to understand that.
Oh, yes. I was, once upon a time, as the chairman said, was in petroleum. I left 5 years ago. But let me say this, and I think the CS has said it. The open tender system that we had was very efficient. In fact, it was so efficient, it has been copied by other companies. What they do, the ministry was doing, was very commendable. They aggregate the total demand for fuel, for example, for next month from the market. If it is 100 million liters of diesel, then they would tender. The ministry would do an open tender, very transparent, and then the companies would, because it's the mean average price in Dubai. Plus, of course, the only thing you quote for is the premium. And because of that competitiveness, we were getting I can tell you for a fact, I don't know of a time when we have ever paid more than $40. In all my life, I was in petroleum. $40 per cubic meter for the premium. It's always 10, sometimes even negative. Some of the big companies, because they source, for many of their chains in other countries, they were even giving negative. I do remember one time. Then we go to G2G. G2G. I have written about it, and I have said this is a crooked deal. We go from $20 to $40 to $100 premium. We were told it will be cheaper. It is not cheaper. We were told it will help on the dollar. It has not helped on the dollar. Find out the day this thing was announced, what the dollar rate was and what the dollar rate is today. We're buying in our industries at 156, average the whole of last week. So it has not helped. It has not helped. Look at what the president of Uganda announced yesterday. He said they've gone into their own. One of the places we are making money as petroleum companies in Kenya is the export to South Sudan and Uganda and you go to Rwanda and those countries. And you get that one in dollars. The transit portion is in dollars and people are making, that is where you get the dollars, as the CS said, which is true. But today, if Uganda decides to go that route, which they announced, then obviously it will not only impact on the business aspect, on the economy in terms of what we were, all those companies and businesses who are doing that, but also it will impact on the G2G deal itself. That and we were told theirs is even cheaper. I don't know the details, but I'm sure CS knows. But I think it's part of the tweaking that we are doing on policies that is causing all this, which I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abraham,
Thank you.
if you can be as quick as Bill was.
Yeah, I will. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much to this committee for.
Just a lot. Now put on your mic. Put on your mic now.
Good now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's really a pleasure to come and join us fellow Kenyans as we discuss these matters which are really of concern. I work in a space where we have also spent a lot of time thinking about this and speaking and presenting. And one of the questions I asked myself when I got the letter was, what more should I say? Because we have said to Parliament, but this provides an opportunity to be able to speak. I will not repeat the matters that Bilo has spoken to, but let me bring us to attention that as we speak right now, according to the statistics we have of 2021, 22 million Kenyans are below the poverty line. And therefore, when we say this, we basically, and that could have changed. In the last 2 years, a lot has changed. Incomes have not increased, if anything, and I have shared in the paper that I've presented. The incomes are actually on a negative growth. And therefore, we are not talking about some utopian institution out there. We are talking of real people. We are talking of Kenyans spread across this republic who cannot put food on the table, who now, because of the cost of the high cost of living, have to choose between medical care and school fees. And you would wonder, so should they worry about medical care now, or should they worry about the future of their children and their education and the like? And therefore, I needed to present that number. That 22 million number is an important number because then it puts a face, it puts a life of somebody in this conversation. And then the slow growth of incomes. I will not talk about so much about the cost of living because that will be the core of what I present. But one of the biggest challenges where we are is that incomes have not changed in the last couple of years. If anything, during the COVID period, and I was just looking at the budget speech that the CS read, earlier this year, there are very few Kenyans who are earning, even be above the figures that we basically increase the taxes. I think it was about 1.1%. So you have a very huge population for who earn much more, but even the incomes have not changed. And the report I'm looking at here is basically by 2021, we are on a negative 6% in terms of decline in incomes. I will not say so much about the dollar, but the dollar has a compounding effect. And therefore, let me speak to the things that we think are critical for us to think about. Public debt and debt servicing has been presented by Bilo, and I'm sure the CS will also speak. The question of in-year deficits, in other words, how deficits grow within the year, is a matter of concern. Mr. Chair, if I was just to just present and say that every year our deficit within the year has increased, say for 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023, where we had a negative 16% and a negative 5%. 2014, 2015, we had a 99% increase in deficit from 367 billion to 732 billion. The year we are talking about, 2022, 2023, 2024, this current financial year, as per the supplementary budget published last week but one, we already have a 20% increase in the deficit from 720 to 864 billion. Unless we rein in the deficit problem, we will still continue to run with a public debt problem that we are unable to manage. And this is important because when you look at the trend, these are changes that happen within the year. Mr. Chairman, if our revenues are not performing, why should our expenditures increase? Why don't we rationalize our expenditures? I want to confirm to this honorable team that I don't think we have a revenue problem. Every year our revenues have been growing year on year, an average of 10%. We have a spending problem. And somebody who is struggling with Fuliza, Tala, branch does not need more money, needs a behavior change. And therefore, it is important for us to rein in, because what we are doing is that we are borrowing more and more and more. But where are we borrowing from? When you look at our debt currently, it's at about 50% each in terms of domestic to external. The debt servicing that we are paying, just one step behind, that whereas our debt is big, our biggest risk exposure is within the domestic market. Mr. Chair and co-chairs, I think this is a matter that we are not having a conversation on. This year alone, we expect to raise a revenue of about 2.5 trillion Kenya shillings. Let me bring it down. We expect to raise about 250 shillings in ordinary revenue. Our consolidated fund services, which includes pensions and constitutional expenditure, is 278, 200 shillings. I'm just using average, it's 2.078 trillion. Out of that, our debt repayment is 1.86 trillion, 186. So do the math, 250 minus the 200, which these are non-discretionary expenditure. So they basically, it's a must pay, it's a must spend. Of that 180, 100 is to the domestic market. Now, why is the domestic market important? It is because a lot of that borrowing has been on double digit. 12%, I think the last coupon I saw was at about 15%. In other words, we are highly at risk because with all that money being held by government, what it has done is that government basically is competing with private sector, with private individuals in the domestic credit market. That is important because when you read the story of what has happened in Greece, in Argentina, recently in Ghana, then it is the domestic market, the famous haircuts, were taken in the domestic market. But why is it important? If you have only, and if you add appropriations in aid, it's another 400 billion. So basically 290 shillings in my simplified figure. What you're saying is that teachers alone will cost you 400 billion. In other words, if you just add teachers' salaries to the consolidated fund services, all the money in ordinary revenue is gone. You've not even paid for military costs. You have not done transfers to devolution. And therefore, I want to suggest to this honorable committee that we have a debt crisis. And it is important that for us to have part of this national dialogue is perhaps to start having a conversation on how do we restructure. I'm avoiding the word default. How do we manage ourselves out of this situation because we do not have money to provide public services? And we have tried to analyze, because when you look at expenditure in social services, you look at expenditure to county governments in terms of the transfers we are making to county governments, everything is on 0%. It's only debt servicing that is on a higher upward trend. We have a crisis. And the earlier we accept we are in a crisis, they say the first step, after denial is acceptance. We need to accept that that is where we are. Because if we don't have this conversation, and there's interesting, the former Greek minister of Greece for finance in Greece has written an interesting paper, and he said one of the biggest problems is that they kept denying that there was a problem until finally, in fact, the paper is called The Denial of the Greek Debt Problem. We cannot continue to say that we are sustainable. We are not sustainable. If we are to provide, something we'll have to give, and it's either public services or how we organize. I think I've executed that matter to the best, because as long as public services will suffer, otherwise we have to borrow more, because this deficit that we have now increased to 864 billion. Where do we expect to get the money from? We have to borrow more. High taxation. As a result of the kind of situation we have where the the space, the fiscal space we have is limited, you then have to raise taxes. But who are you raising these taxes from, I beg to ask? Including the housing levy, which I still don't understand the concept. And I consider myself among the Kenyans who read public documents, perhaps more voraciously. And I still don't understand why you are taking more money from people for a concept. 80% of Kenyans, and this is the only thing I'll say on housing, live in their own homes. Have you asked them the kind of housing they need? I rest it there. High taxation, therefore, because of the situation we find ourselves in, the only option left is to raise more taxes. And when you raise more taxes, the group that you are targeting is only two kinds of individuals or legal persons. Is a corporate institution, a business entity, a premise that is registered and that is providing a public service. Providing a good to the public and therefore they purchase it, or an incomed citizen. That incomed citizen also has to pay taxes in terms of VAT, because income even includes a person who gets 100 shillings, in terms of their daily. And therefore, when we are thinking about taxes, would it be time to actually rethink the speed at which we are introducing taxes in a context where even the business environment is shrinking and incomes are not necessarily growing? I think here is a pacing question. And what do we introduce? Can you introduce all these taxes at the same time? But let me speak to the one on energy, because that is a critical one. Here, you have diesel that, of course, drives a lot of the IPPs in terms of energy, and I really thank Mr. Chirchir here, because he's really explained quite well. But that diesel already had been charged a tax, so almost one could argue, are we going through a situation of double taxation? But when you look at the taxes, and we did outline, just in the pump, and the EPRA has really provided. You have excise duty, you have road maintenance levy, you have petroleum development levy, you have petroleum regulatory levy, you have railway development levy, you have anti-adulteration levy, merchant shipping levy, import declaration fee, and value-added tax. And when you work out those numbers, you find that out of the 217, for instance, you will pay at the pump, 80 shillings of that is taxes. Wouldn't this be the best place, for instance, to say, given the situation we are in currently, can we pause? Can we give a rebate? Well, because why should the cost always be transferred to the consumer? Can it be the other way around? To say, can we give a pause to some of these taxes because of the state? Because we are talking about cost of living. Now, all this is compounded in the fact that in October, from the statistics again we have, 13% transport, there was a 13% increase in transport costs in terms of inflation. So that tells you that 13% in terms of increase, in transportation costs gets transferred to all our institutions. Finally, and perhaps to an animal that we have not given a lot of attention, I want to present that if we are going to manage the cost of government and the cost of living right now, we have to make a decision on what to do with state-owned enterprises. 25 to 28%, and I'm using that figure because we are to confirm for now, is of MDA's expenditure is by state corporations. Those state corporations, the last count we have made, they are at about 248 of them. These are not the 48 county governments, neither are they the 22 ministries at the national level. These are institutions, some doing duplicate work in different ministries, 25%. Now, this, when you go to the budget, is also the space where we don't have very much transparency about what goes on. We only find figures when there is need for a bailout for Kenya Airways. I'm giving an example because it's the one, for instance, in the supplementary first budget here has an increase of 1.7 billion in guaranteed debt to Kenya Airways. It's in the books. And during the review, the stock risk exposure, according to the BPS 2023, during the review period 2022-2023, the stock of risk exposure is estimated at 2.7 trillion, where 2.66 trillion is from state-owned enterprises. This is from the National Treasury report. So in other words, you are stuck with many structures that give you the highest risk with the least transparency. If you ask me, Mr. Chair, co-chairs, I think if we are going to deal with the cost of living, let us action on matters of how do we manage debt moving forward, including dealing with the deficits. Let us make a very decisive decision. What do we do with taxation that has to do with fuel, because that is being translated to every part of the economy. And let us action. There is a whole report on merging, selling state-owned enterprises. In fact, I think PBO and Bwana Masinde is here, did an estimate that if you were to sell, if you were to privatize some of them, I think will make about 30 billion annually. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now give him the floor to tell us whether he plans to do something about them. And this is the beauty of this engagement and this dialogue, is that you have an opportunity to say what you have said to other institutions. Bilo has been very well heard in the media, and now he can be heard by Kenyans, and the CS can hear him, both CS National Treasury and Energy. So, Professor.
Thank you very much, members and the co-chairs and everybody else who is listening. It's actually a very informative debate, which actually can push me even to ask questions. But I would make sure that I don't do that. The DNA in me will be suppressed. The DNA in me is that I'm a teacher. So I would suppress that, Your Excellency. You already are familiar with that. But I wanted to find out, I want advice from you, Your Excellency, co-chair, and Bwana Kimani Ichung'wah, the co-chair. Should I first of all comment on what has gone through, or should I first of all do I had some written submission on the 3 areas that I was asked to talk about, but they also interlinked with some of the issues that have come up.
I think the best, my view, Kimani may have a different view, is you please make your presentation.
Okay.
And then after that, comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without necessarily repeating what has already been said.
Okay. I think the statement I started with was on the cost of living and also related issues to that. And what I did was to prepare some responses that would actually try to explain where we are. Because I think, I'm sorry to say that sometimes when we find ourselves in a problem, we start thinking that that problem has just emerged. It has been there. It is the problem that we failed to arrest the problem that we find ourselves in the same problem. So, in fact, when I looked at this, I said, yes, it is important for us to look at the cost of living. But also, we have to also ask
East
ourselves,
Africa,
how is it computed? How does it come about? Why are we beaten twice by this problem? And it has come up several other times. So in this presentation, I want to look at the cost of living. I want to look at the implications of the Finance Act 2023. I also want to look at the implications of what has come so severally on the removal of any taxes, levies, and charges to cushion Kenyans against high cost of living and their attendant cost to the economy. as trying to define
Tumeshindwa. Then the people can decide for themselves what to do. Thank you.
Well done. I think Senator Mgeni, and then would we allow Bilo to try and make? I think you can be very brief. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, the first one is to CS Energy. From the table that I have before me, fuel lands at a cost of 123. When you add taxes, it goes to 217. And it seems taxation on fuel can have an impact on tax collection. I read last week that KRA has missed its target on fuel by 1.2 billion in the first quarter of 2023-2024. And that's a negative effect on our desire to collect taxes. Now, CS, this is the statistics. That's the real position on the ground. What should be the way forward, bearing in mind also that these high taxes have a very high cost, a very high impact on the cost of living? Number two, this issue of subsidy related to the 80 shillings that Kenyans pay as a tax per litre of fuel they consume. They understand it, subsidy is a measure the government puts in place to lower the cost of fuel or the price of fuel so that you cushion the general public. Now, we all agree that the cost of fuel is beyond the reach of many Kenyans as we speak. Some countries like Mexico, President Lopez is using subsidy to cushion the citizen. Doesn't the government feel the pain of Kenyans, the suffering of Kenyans, to consider this issue of subsidy? Now, to the CS Treasury. This process has been very consultative, CS Ndungu. This is maybe to CS Ndungu and housing. Now, listen to the situation on the ground. The chair of public service told us that because of this sudden increase in taxes, including what you are calling an investment on housing levy, civil servants are undergoing serious depression. And those are the Kenyans you tax to give service. They are undergoing serious depression. These are the statistics from the public service itself. About 12,532 public officers have sought psychosocial support in the financial year 2022-2023, a steep rise from a figure of 6,600 in the previous financial year 2018-2019. In terms of what in their pocket, Hinga, is that about 17,000 of the public servants are earning less than 1/3, and they will never benefit from this very ambitious housing development agenda of UDA. So they are not going to be able to take mortgages for the houses you are building. Now, two proposals have been put on the table. The first one is the public service itself, and these are policy shift even as we are waiting for the cost case. They propose that to cushion these poor public officers, you consider housing levy to be taxed at basic, not gross. That has come from the public service itself, control of budget, and parliamentary budget office. The second one is even more I think maybe controversial and reasonable. The public service argues that this investment you are doing, there are a number of public officers who have already taken mortgages, and you cannot force them to take another mortgage. Their payslip can't take that mortgage. And the public service is proposing that they should be exempted from this additional housing levy so that you give relief to them and boost their performance. What would be your comment? If you permit me, I will ask Biro Kero. Biro Kero, we have worked together before in anti-corruption, and the statistics that we have as Kenyans is that Fuliza has grown spontaneously since the launch of the ASLA fund. How do you explain this when the government has opined that the ASLA fund has been fairly successful? And then maybe finally, there is a comment that was made here by the controller of budget that at times we budget for corruption. This is to you, CS Treasury. Now, state corporation budgets, really, according to the control of budget, can be a conduit for corruption on government money. That being the problem, CS, what would be your recommendation on the way forward? Because the people who have spoken here have said corruption actually contributes largely to the high cost of living. Then the El Nino allocation, CS, has this money been spent or it's lying somewhere? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can now begin answering sessions, but not before I make just a small comment. You know, I was not here the day Margaret Nyakango made her confessions, or so to speak, but I find her confession to be a typical Kenyan problem. If you read our constitution, Article 228(5), on the responsibilities and the roles of a controller of budget. Allow me just to read it verbatim so that we have it on record. The controller shall not approve any withdrawal from a public fund unless satisfied that the withdrawal is authorized by law. So here you have the person that the Constitution has given the responsibility of ensuring that any withdrawal from the public kitty is her mandate. Then she comes before the committee and tells us, I have seen this being budgeted elsewhere and I don't know how money is being lost. Surely, with that confession, I thought probably we should have asked her to resign. Because if you are allowing withdrawals through what is now being revealed to the committee and called budgeted corruption, then it means either you're incompetent or you are part and parcel of those that are stealing from us.
Information. Order.
Yeah, and order.
Honorable Chairs, there's a statement which is circulating attributed to the CS for National Treasury. It's dated today. It's a statement in response to the allegations by the controller of budget. I just wanted to ask you answer Professor Ndungu, perhaps address the issue in your statement, because it has just come before us now, on page 2, where you claim that for financial year 2022-2023, approved budget for personal allowances for the office of the controller of budget was Kenya shillings 7.3 million, which was reduced to Kenya shillings 700,000 in the supplementary budget. Yet actual expenditure was only Kenya shillings 50,000. And now come this financial year, you still go ahead to budget for Kenya shillings 7.5 million. What would have informed this budgeting if the previous financial year, the only expenditure was 50,000 shillings? Down from a budget of 7.3 million. Is this what Nyakango was talking about? Finally, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
I will answer that, Your Excellency, because I think we are looking at personal allowances and salaries differently. So
and yet
I have
and yet,
itemized
Prof,
that. Yeah.
yet, Prof, before you answer, I want us to lift the work of this committee beyond beyond incriminating other people, because we may not have the ability. I mean, unless we call them for come and respond. I think there's a principle in law which says at some stage, let the laws lie where it belongs or where it is. I would therefore, I know that Aaron feels very strongly about this, but I think we need to be able to moderate even ourselves, because there'll be things which may be unpalatable. We've heard of new and old state capture. We have heard all those things, and without even bringing names. So, I personally think that we should avoid a situation where we reduce this session into discussion of the control of budget. Thank you.
But, Mr. Chairman, I think Aaron was alluding to a statement where he was not there in present, but he's just giving a comment on the same. This is the same control of budget who said she was sent SMSs to withdraw 7 billion shillings and kind of thing.
Via WhatsApp.
Via WhatsApp. So
anyway, I think Bilo had requested to have the first bite so that he can leave. And since you are my budget and finance committee chair, Bilo,
I'll comment.
Please make a comment on that issue.
I
Office of the Control of Budget, so that we are able to know whether what she is alleging is true, or we need to be a bit more prudent with our public officers.
Very well. Thank you very much, Chairman. If you, I think, were there earlier, I did actually talk about that and say the buck stops with the control of budget, because no money can be withdrawn without our express approval, as you read very clearly. So I think...
Yet below, it's not a matter of withdrawal of monies. From what we had from the controller.
The second part, the one on the budget.
Because we should talk about personal emoluments.
The MP raised.
Yes.
I think is very important.
Okay.
The challenge we have, Mr. Chairman, is Treasury is required to use zero-based budgeting. Then they would look at what did this person spend last year? 50,000? Yes, 50,000. But when you go by incremental system, how much was the budget office last year? The budget figure in the estimates was 7.5. They just start from 7.5 and add something. So this is part of the challenges we have. But it's very clear that notwithstanding whatever has been budgeted, Mr. Chairman, whether it's repeated, our salary is repeated 3 times or 4 times, no withdrawal can be done without approval from the control of budget. I think that's very clear. So in other words, if that money is lost, if for whatever reason somebody used her name to withdraw money, then I think clearly her office would know and should be in a position to. So very quickly, Chairman, the questions which were asked. On the hustler, let me start from, not in any particular order, but very quickly. I think that the main challenge on the uptake of hustler, why it's not, in my view, as successful as Fuliza is because it did not meet the expectations for whatever reasons. I think people expected probably the amounts to be higher, or but the fact that the interest rates is only 8%, and Fuliza has a higher percentage, did not stop Kenyans from continuing with Fuliza. And now you'll see that in Fuliza the default rate is nil. With Hustler the default rate is 20%. And the uptake is low, and this is why Treasury, I think, probably was able to reduce it to 5 billion. So I think probably the expectations people had from government
on a lighter note, I heard C.S. Ndungu say he's actually a member of Hustler Fund. Well, I think he does that as a minister responsible, maybe to monitor the uptake or whatever.
Yes,
but I think Mr. Professor Ndungu cannot be that kind of a hustler.
But it's important that we take note, underline what the CS Treasury said about market. Let us incentivize the markets to do their work. If we really looked at what Fuliza is doing, and government looked at, start with Fuliza and probably looked at some of the challenges, they would not need to allocate money to do Fuliza's work. If government looked at incentivize the housing, the construction, the contractors, in terms of tax remissions, in terms of, granting bank facilities or lower, bank. So I think then you would not have needed Kenyans to be taxed, 1.5 plus 3% to fund housing. I think the market thing, Bwana CS, Treasury, if it is important that you put your foot down on your colleagues, that let us not try and do everything as government, because that money will come from taxpayers and we don't have the money. On the IPP, Mr. Chairman, I only want to comment and say that there was a very, very good report in September last year on the independent power purchase agreement by the task force, the presidential task force. We need that one to be implemented. It will address all the challenges we have discussed here. Do we have the political will to implement that power purchase agreement task force report, which was very clear, and eminent Kenyans actually spend a lot of time coming up with what needs to be done to address that matter. On the dollar, I think what the CS, I would advise the CS Treasury to do is, even now under his watch, the challenge that the reason why Kenyans are keeping $8 billion in their commercial bank accounts, and they're not, selling it to the bank, is because of the existence of the dual exchange rate. It is there up to now. Let him do away with that. Why would central bank tell you that the exchange rate is 150? When you go and want to buy it, it's 156, 157. So I think if that is not there, nobody will keep that money. So the question of the shortage or the would disappear. The tax review, I have suggested, that there are actually taxes which are critical, and the most common ones are the levies. These levies are called levies, but they're in forms of taxes, and they're not being used for the purposes for which they were originally intended. This is why I said some of those levies need to be reviewed and need to be removed, really, and they're not adding value except making the cost of production higher. And the ones for fuel has been mentioned, for example, and the ones I have mentioned, things like the one for Agricultural Food Authority, the one RDL, Railway Development, which really it's not being used to service that loan, and so forth. So I think those are some of the taxes that, in my view, needs to be reviewed. Then on the market, the dollar, still on the dollar, I heard the CSA, this thing was managed. But let me tell you, in any country, because of external shocks, to insulate the economy, the manufacturers and businessmen and everyone from sudden volatility, any country you go in this world, central banks do intervene in the exchange rate to avoid that sudden volatility. It is normal. If, for example, the shilling today goes to 200, central bank cannot just sit and wait. Tomorrow, people who are doing businesses, there'll be chaos. You have to try and go to the market. And this is what I think has been happening in the past. And I think that can still happen. But what we are seeing is that there's need to really address that issue. My worry is that government of Kenya seems to depend on IMF. That IMF tells you your sharing is overvalued, and so we just go back and say, okay, and relax. But I think we need to look at the economy critically and to avoid that kind of thing. Mr. Chairman, 2 or 3 others I just want to mention very quickly. One, for the cost of living. For cost of living, I think, and I've said it very clearly in my report, we must review every policy and regulatory proposal in terms of its impact on the cost of living before cabinet and parliament approval is sought. I think this is important. Because you see every day, a department, a ministry, coming up with something. We're going to introduce this. We're going to charge this. We're going to change this. Every change of policy that has an impact on the cost of living should not be taken, to cabinet and parliament until it has been examined clearly in terms of its impact on the cost of living. I think this is important. There was a bill last year in 2021 before Parliament to amend the PFM, Public Finance Management Act, to give members of Parliament to require that all loans must get prior approval from Parliament before Treasury signs the dotted lines. I think that is critical, gentlemen and ladies. This is critical. Otherwise, we will continue getting parliaments as a rubber stamp, approving loans which have been signed in London, in Korea, in Japan, anywhere. And, I think it's something that law needs to be revisited. It's critical. Chairman, very quickly, the last two I want to mention is that, in my view, to address these challenges on the economy, because there is a disconnect between what Kenyans feel about the state of the economy and what needs to be done and what the government thinks. I think it's time we have a national convention on the status of the economy with the right stakeholders. You have to get, the people who are in business, you have to get the professional and business organizations and forums, you have to get the farmers, the industries, and so forth. Let us discuss really this issue about our economy, because there are challenges. Government does not engage adequately with business. That is the challenge. And so we can't just, as government, come up with rules and regulations, and then businesses feel there sometimes. And there are sectors where people are engaged, but I think there are many, and there's benefit. It will give government an opportunity also to listen. Listen to the farmers. Listen to the industry, to investors, to SMEs. That is very important. Instead of just, a top-down approach. Lastly, I think I want to conclude by saying that the question of spending, as Dr. Rugo said, is critical. Unless we cut our clothes to our size, we will continue to be talking in these forums. And I think the argument by Treasury, and I heard what the CS said, that we cannot just, which expenses will be cut. I think clearly what we know is that if you take a pen and paper and go through the printed estimates, really, there are things which are not a priority. There are things which you can defer. Even needs can be deferred so that you don't get into a bigger crisis. I think it's important we review the question of spending so that we can keep this country in one piece. Otherwise, we will go over the precipice. This is my thoughts. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Honorable Bill Okero. Do we follow that order?
Yeah.
We follow that order. Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Abram.
Thank you, Co-Chairs. I was asked two questions. One, Bilo has responded to a bit, but first I was asked, is it true that 80% of Kenyans? I want to also encourage the PS for housing to refer to national statistics. He referred to documents by other people out there. We have a national census 2019, which is what we use. This is what it says. There are 12.1 million households in this country. They are divided between rural and urban. Rural are 7.4, urban are 4.7. 86%, that is 6.3 in rural, own their own homes. And that's the figure I was referring to. Maybe just to clarify that. Yes, 86. And if you heard my comment, I was saying, what is the need in the rural areas for building houses? Because he said he has written to every member of parliament asking for land. I don't think even any MP owns land in the first place, public land, but that's a story for another day. And 21.3 in urban areas own their own homes. The rest rent. A good number rent. The question is, do they have a problem renting? Is there anything across the world? Most populations live in rented homes, rented houses. Of course, we have a challenge. Is a challenge actually that there are no houses or that people cannot afford mortgages? I think let's address the right challenge. And that's why I say I think there's still a lot to be discussed around the housing. I will not belabor that. What to do with, why say cut taxes on one side, and at the same time cut spending? Is indeed a contradictory. It is not. The reason for that is that the more we discuss this as purely a revenue problem, the more we get it wrong, in my opinion. Because we seem to say all our expenditures are right. I gave an example of the state-owned enterprises. If you go through the levies, a lot of those levies and rates are charged to maintain these state-owned enterprises because they have to get some money to keep them going, because that's basically what they established, and agencies. And in my opinion, I think that it will be of value to, first of all, remember those institutions, just to take us one step back, are also playing in this intergovernmental space were between counties and national government. Look at the number of them in the water sector. Look at the number of them, in the different frameworks, and we seem to be even creating more with the law. So there is a possibility to actually look at the efficiencies, and the Auditor General is on record, just flagging out expenditures that were not right. If you work on all those numbers, including the 2 billion that the current government has committed to confirm whether it's true that, as per the former president, that we lose 2 billion every day. If you do the math, if you were to cursorily look at that figure, 2 billion per day gives you about 710 billion in a year. That gives you almost the deficit that we are talking about. So there are options, and the options is not just going and saying, let's raid this ministry and cut their expenditure, but it has to be a mix. Look at the tax expenditures, already some improvements there. That is the amount of money we give in terms of rebates. Why not go and reduce that so that we give rebates to Kenyans in terms of their, and the rest is what we've talked about, the fuel. Must we charge everything? Because we are saying we are not in normal times. Yet there is something we can do. The last question, which was about KQ, I think a lot of these state-owned enterprises need to run on a business model. You don't make a profit, you don't run, you shut down. We don't go to save every other company out there. We should actually be saving, because right now, as we hear of capital flight, we should actually be working to save that. So we cannot continue to save companies that are not performing, yet doing business. Kenya Airways, anybody who flies with Kenya Airways, despite the delays here and there, is fairly full. At least I have fallen. It's always fairly full. So I don't understand where the loss comes from, and it's the most expensive, just to also say, so those are my thoughts, and happy to continue with this conversation. Thank you very much.
Much, Abraham. We will now, I think we go to the PS, don't you think so? PS Inga, and then we come to the CSS. But even as you do so, the few houses that Kenyans have put up for themselves get demolished. That's the house, that's your department. And some of them are really very, very expensive houses. And yet we heard from Hassan Omar's Kenya Kwanza government that the demolition be a thing of the past. So what happened in Mavoko is heart-rending. Does it prick your conscience? Does it really? Just for me, I should have put this to you, because you're such a marketer, and I know you. So today we are not going to get you to sweat, but please think about some of those things.
Now you want me to start sweating, and I think I had done pretty well. If I was to answer the questions in a methodical way from the co-chair and the majority leader, he spoke about, other than the hinges, these other items, what is the policy intervention? One, what we have done is we have identified the 69. Number two, we have standardized them. It's very, very important. Why standardization? In Kenya, we don't have a standard door. We don't. Because a door in Kenya is basically the space that you leave after you finish building your house. Meaning that you must get a fundi to come and customize your door. And if we continue on that line, we will never be able to benefit from the large economies of scale. So it is important that, first of all, we standardize, and we have done the standard. We have come up with what is called a Juakali manual, which is available. We have given it to them, and with the standards for those 69 items. The next thing is to take this thing to Parliament so that it becomes now entrenched. We are discussing with our committee whether it is going to be as a bill or as a policy. I understand that there is somebody who had brought in a bill in Parliament. We'll see whether we can be able to ride on it. Your Excellency, the Honorable Vice Chair, I think when we talk about the housing levy being an investment in ourselves, we are actually not. We're not using it incorrectly. We are investing in ourselves. And how do we invest in ourselves?
But is it a tax? You need to come out clearly.
It is a tax. Yeah.
So
But
why
it's a
do you
tax.
call it a levy in your presentation?
A levy is a tax.
A levy and a tax, there's no difference.
Actually, just go take the definition of a levy from what do you call it? Wikipedia. It is a tax. Okay.
And the CS calls it an investment. It's a bit
But
confusing.
the effect is we're investing in ourselves, okay? Because we are taking that money and putting it in productive sectors that are going to be very important in the creation of jobs.
But Mr. Hinga, let's be clear. You say a levy is a tax.
Yes.
Now, my own understanding, we've heard it from here, from various presenters. A task, if it is a housing tax, then everybody, irrespective of who they are, will be subject to that tax.
Correct.
To tax. But if it's a levy, then you can even go on a voluntary basis. Those who want to, because there are people, for example, who are in their 60s, going to retire, or may have retired, and they're paying a housing tax. So they ask themselves, how will this benefit me? Because I'm just about to retire. But if it is a tax, then of course they have to pay. And that is a punitive aspect that Eugene was talking about. Yeah.
I think from the PS, the CS's presentation is calling it an investment. An investment can be voluntary. And, according to the priority of either that teacher, that lawyer, that doctor, that policeman. But what is oppressive about this is that you must pay it as an employer. It's cutting both ways, including people losing their jobs because they can't sustain this.
Correct.
Yeah. The CS didn't just refer to it as an investment. He actually qualified it further and said that this is an investment, not a tax.
Yes.
Please help us understand.
Not a tax. Now you are contradicting your own senior colleague there.
I said I'll come and rectify
Okay.
that because it's
Okay,
right
okay.
up. Let me come at my turn to try and rectify that.
Yeah, but as of now, we are hearing from Bwana that this is a tax.
This is a tax.
And in fact, the CS actually called it an intervention. I heard you say it's an intervention. I knew it was a tax. Everybody knows it was a tax. When we dropped it as an issue of a saving, it was immediately communicated on Parliament as a tax. So I don't know where that misunderstanding has come from the last day of this presentation.
Okay, and
let's clarify. This housing levy is based on an amendment to the Employment Act. So it cannot be a tax.
It is a levy, which is a tax.
This is one government, but you are mixing us. The taxation was done through amendment to the Employment Act. So it cannot. Yeah.
All right.
Which is which?
I will leave the CS Treasury to handle the issue of the tax because I don't want to speak out of turn. Now, so the question was, you gave a very good example, the Honorable Excellency Co-Chair, about Egypt. And I think that's a very good example. But I don't know whether you've realized that for Egypt to be where they are today, in the year 2014, they made a determination to go on the same journey that we are starting today. They built new cities. They built, how many units they built? Is it 1 million? Huh? They've done between 700 and 1 million units since 2014, the last 9 years. So you're right. But we cannot say we now take our jobs to Egypt.
Not by overtaxing Egyptians.
No, there is a tax.
The context was different, but please continue. I don't want you to sweat for sure.
No. Sweating is biblical according to my CS. So, anyway,
overtaxing is also biblical. You heard of the donkey who spoke to Balaam.
I think you need to be fair to Hinga. Yeah, just let him answer the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, and then let the other clarities, whether it's a tax, whether it's not a tax, be given. And we then come and make recommendations as